Imagine standing in a field surrounded by 80,000 of your closest comrades, only to realize you are all trapped in a giant human meat grinder. This is the story of how one military genius turned the largest army Rome had ever assembled into a massive graveyard in a single afternoon. The year is 216 BC. The place is Cannae, in southeastern Italy. Rome was angry, really angry. A brilliant general named Hannibal Barca had crossed the Alps with war elephants and was ravaging the Italian countryside. He had already humiliated Rome in two major battles, first at the Trebia River, then at Lake Trasimene. Rome was accustomed to winning, and these defeats were a bitter pill to swallow. The Roman Senate decided enough was enough. They needed to crush Hannibal once and for all, so they raised the largest army in their history, 86,000 men. These were not raw recruits. They were highly disciplined legionaries, heavily armed, and fiercely loyal. They had the numbers, the superior heavy armor, and the absolute certainty of victory. Hannibal, on the other hand, had only 50,000 men, many of them mercenaries from different lands: Gauls, Spaniards, Africans. They spoke different languages. They used different weapons. On paper, the odds were heavily in Rome's favor. But Rome had a massive weakness. Two weaknesses, actually. Their names were Varro and Paulus, the two Roman consuls chosen to lead the army. They did not like each other. They did not trust each other. And by Roman law, they had to alternate supreme command every single day. One day Paulus was in charge, cautious, analytical, favoring defensive tactics. The next day Varro was in charge, aggressive, impatient, hungry for personal glory. Hannibal knew this. He had spent years studying his enemies, and he knew exactly how to use Varro's impatience as a weapon. It's August 2nd. The sun is blistering hot. A strong, dry wind blows dust directly into the eyes of the Roman soldiers. It's Varro's day to command. He looks across the plain, sees the Carthaginian army lined up, and decides today is the day. He orders the massive Roman army to advance. Varro's plan was simple: brute force. He packed his infantry exceptionally deep, wanting to create a massive human battering ram that would smash straight through the center of Hannibal's line. He believed sheer mass would overwhelm the Carthaginians. It was a logical plan for a brute force commander. But Hannibal was not a brute force commander. He was a chess grandmaster playing against a novice. He lined up his men in a very strange way. In the center, he placed his weakest troops, Spanish and Gallic infantry. On the far left and right flanks, he placed his elite, battle-hardened African veterans, kept slightly back, out of sight. Then he marched his weak center forward, forming his line into a crescent shape, bowing outward toward the advancing Romans. To Varro, this looked like a weak spot. It looked like an invitation. The Roman war machine surged forward. Thousands of heavy boots shook the ground. The two armies collided with a deafening crash of bronze and iron. As expected, the heavy Roman infantry began pushing the weak Carthaginian center back. The crescent flattened out. The Roman soldiers cheered. They thought they were winning. They pushed harder, packing themselves tighter into the middle, desperate to break the line. But Hannibal's center wasn't breaking. It was retreating on purpose, a controlled, slow-motion backward march. Hannibal himself stood right there in the middle, keeping his men calm, making sure the retreat never turned into a panic. The crescent went from bowing outward to flat to bowing inward. It became a U shape. The Romans were being drawn deeper into a pocket. Because they were pushing so hard into the center, the Roman columns crowded together. The soldiers on the inside could no longer move. They could barely raise their shields. They could barely swing their swords. Meanwhile, on the sides of that U-shape, Hannibal's elite African veterans stood fresh. They hadn't fought yet. Suddenly, Hannibal gave the signal. The veterans on the left and right turned inward and slammed into the exposed flanks of the Roman column. At the exact same moment, Carthaginian cavalry defeated the Roman cavalry on the wings and rode around to the back of the army. The trap was closed. The U-shape became a complete circle. 80,000 Roman soldiers were now surrounded by a ring of steel. What followed was not a battle. It was a slaughterhouse. The Romans were packed together like cattle. The men in the middle couldn't see what was happening. They could only hear the horrific screams of their comrades on the outer edges. Slowly, the circle of death pressed inward. Every step the Carthaginians took, the circle grew smaller. Historians estimate that for several hours, Romans were killed at a rate of over 100 men per minute. The heat was suffocating. The dust was blinding. The ground became a slippery mire of mud and blood. Some Roman soldiers were so terrified they dug holes in the dirt, stuck their heads inside, and suffocated themselves just to end the nightmare. Consul Paulus was wounded early by a stone from a sling. He refused to abandon his men and died fighting in the thick of the crowd. Consul Varro, the man whose impatience started it all, managed to escape with a small group of horsemen. By sunset, the noise finally stopped. The silence over the field of Cannae was deafening. Nearly 70,000 Roman soldiers lay dead. Another 10,000 were captured. Only a fraction escaped. Hannibal had lost fewer than 6,000 men, mostly from the weak center that had served as bait. It was the single deadliest day of combat in Western history. To put that into perspective, more soldiers died at Cannae in a single afternoon than the United States military lost during the entire war in Vietnam. When news reached Rome, the city plunged into absolute panic. They declared national mourning. They banned the word peace. They even resorted to human sacrifice, burying people alive in the city square to appease the gods. They believed the end of their civilization had arrived, but it hadn't. Surprisingly, Hannibal did not march on Rome. His generals urged him to, but he lacked the heavy siege equipment to take the fortified city. This gave Rome time to breathe and to learn. They realized they could not beat Hannibal in a direct battle, so they changed their strategy entirely. They avoided him. They targeted his supply lines. They attacked his allies. They wore him down through attrition. Years later, a Roman general named Scipio Africanus studied Hannibal's own tactics and used them against him, defeating him at the Battle of Zama and ending the war. The trap at Cannae remains the gold standard of military tactics. For over 2,000 years, generals have studied this battle. They call it the double-envelopment, the perfect tactical maneuver, the thing every military commander still dreams of achieving. But Cannae is also a dark reminder of human nature. It shows how easily confidence curdles into arrogance. It shows how a crowd of 80,000 disciplined men can be blinded by the illusion of victory. The Romans thought they were marching toward glory. They were actually walking into their own graves, step by step, guided by the hand of a master. In the end, the greatest trap is never the one built from wood and steel. It's the one built inside your opponent's mind.